Hi everyone. So in lesson 8.3, we're going to learn how to multiply and divide complex numbers. So we're going to have to use the polar things that we learned about last class. Okay, so our theorems say that the product theorem tells us that if we're multiplying, or two numbers, complex numbers are being multiplied, and we multiply their moduli, which is, remember, the r, and then we'll add their arguments, which was the theta. So if this is our polar form of our numbers, the solution to the product of this would be R1 times R2 CIS of the two angles added together. So the division theorem, the quotient theorem, it makes a lot of sense with this, except now we're doing division. So it's almost the same, except we're going to divide their moduli, and then we subtract the thetas, their angles, which if you remember your rules of exponents, it's exactly the same, because if you're dividing, you subtract the exponents too. So same idea. So let's take a look at our examples on the inside. So we got 4 multiplication and 4 division. So let's look at our first one. So we're going to multiply these complex numbers. So just like our theorem said, we multiply the arguments, or the moduli. So 3 times 2 is going to give us 6 CIS, and then we'll add their arguments. So 45 plus 135. So the product would be 6 CIS of 180 degrees. Now, as you can see, most of the time we want to write our answers in rectangular form, not in polar form. So we'd have to convert it back, which is what we learned last class. So you just got to remember that this right here is the polar form. And now we're going to change to rectangular. So that means we're going to have 6 times the cosine of 180. So the cosine of 180, remember 180 is over here, is negative 1. And the sine of 180 is 0. So if we distribute our 6, we just end up with negative 6. So this is our rectangular form. So this last part was just what we learned last class. This part is the new part. So for, let's work our way down. So for this one, same idea. 7 times 8 is going to give us 56 CIS. Add their arguments. We get 180 again. So the same thing, 56 times the cosine. So 56 times negative 1 plus I times 0 would be just negative 56. Okay, so our next one, as you can see, we have decimals in the front, and our angles are not going to be exact. Oh, JK, our angles are exact. But we have these decimals in the front, so let's times them out and see what we get. So 2.5 times 3.25, we end up with 8.125. Since my calculator makes it a fraction, I'm going to do it that way, so then we end up with exact answers. So we have 65 over 8 CIS, and then 115 plus 35 is 150. So 65 over 8, the cosine of 150. So let's draw our triangle for 150. This is our 150. We have a reference angle of 30. So the cosine is going to be negative root 3 over 2. The sine is 1/2. So times the tops and times the bottoms. So we end up with negative 65 root 3 over 16 plus 65I over 16. So why don't you go ahead and try the problem below it, and then we'll talk about the answers, and then we'll do our division. Okay, so since this one had a degree that was not exact, 175, I just typed it in the calculator. So it was kind of like the one we did from the last set of notes. So we would have 25.11 cosine of 175, which is how we got the negative 25.01. Okay, so let's do division. So same idea with division, except it's backwards. So we're going to divide the numbers in front and subtract these. So 27 divided by 9 is 3. And remember, it's subtracting. So 45 minus negative 180 is going to end up being adding. So 45 plus 180 is 225. So that's the new part from this lesson. The rest of it is just changing them back to rectangular. So 3 times the cosine of 225 plus I sine of 225. So the cosine of 225, it has a reference angle of 45, so we're going to have our root 2's. So that would be negative root 2 over 2, and the sign is the same. So our final answer would be negative 3 root 2 over 2 minus 3I root 2 over 2. Okay, good. So let's do our next problem down here. This one has radians in it, but it's done the same way, so don't freak out, okay? So 50 divided by 5 is 10 CIS. Now we want 7 pi over 6 minus pi over 3. I'm going to do this in here. 7 pi over 6 minus pi over 3. We want common denominators, so that'd be 7 pi over 6 minus 2 pi over 6. So we get 5 pi over 6. So if you're uncomfortable with the radians, we could have changed them before we did that, or we can change them now. So it'd be CIS of 150, and then we can just convert. So the cosine of 150 is negative root 3 over 2, and the sine of 150 is 1/2. So if we distribute, we get negative 5 root 3 plus 5i. Okay. So why don't you guys try the last two that are left. On this one, we're going to end up having decimals because our answer is not exact. So go ahead and pause your video and do those two, and when you come back, I'll show you the solutions. Okay, so for the first one, we had an angle measure that was exact, so we got our numbers, and it ended up being one of our special right triangle sides. For the last one, we got 5 pi over 12, which is the equivalent to 75, so that's how we ended up with the decimals. So the main idea here is what you do when it's multiplication and what you do in division. So if you remember those rules, you'll be good. So that is it for 8.3. Werner out.